Welcome. Have you ever considered how many blessings you possess? We have so many blessings that we are no longer aware of them and can never be content. Do you ever feel tired? And do you complain about being tired? I can almost hear you saying, "Oh my God, I'm so tired. I hate this job." But what if I told you to think about the people who are trying to have the job you hate? What if there's a person who spends their life confined to a bed and never gets tired? Yes, being tired is a wonderful thing. Some people even miss tiredness because they've forgotten what tiredness is. Throughout this video, I will tell you about many ancient traditions. You don't need a map. What I will present to you tonight is not a technique to be mastered or a practice to be perfected. It's more like a long, warm conversation between old friends. The kind of conversation that begins after dinner when the candles start to go out, where no one is in a hurry, the words come slowly, and are more meaningful than ever. Throughout this journey, we will wander among the stories and teachings of many traditions, from the silent halls of Zen, the diaries of Stoic philosophers, the flowing rivers of Taoism, and the deep wells of Islamic wisdom. These traditions may seem to come from different worlds, but if you listen carefully, in each one you will hear the same thing with a different voice in different clothes coming from a different direction and always pointing to the same place. Hold on, then let go. Then discover how much lighter the world becomes. Now let your shoulders relax. Let your breath find its own easy rhythm. And let us begin together. Welcome. Wherever you are right now, whatever this day has left on you, whatever weight still lingers at the edges of your shoulders, whatever thought has been visiting you without an invitation, you are welcome here, exactly as you are. Tonight we are going to walk together along a path that has been walked by shepherds and sages, by desert mystics and mountain monks, by ordinary people who lay down in the dark and ask the same question you may be asking now. Is it possible that I am enough? Is it possible that beneath all of this noise, all of this striving, all of this quiet disappointment in myself, there is something whole? We will visit some of the oldest wisdom traditions on this earth. The Sufis who walked through the desert with a candle held against the wind, the Stoics who sat with their grief and called it a teacher, the Zen masters who swept their floors as if eternity lived in the bristles, the Taoist sages who watched water and learned what mountains could not teach, the Anadolu mystics who carried God's name in the breath between heartbeats, the shaman who read the sky the way we read faces, with love and with attention. We will move slowly. There is nowhere to be. Let your body settle now. Let the pillow hold your head the way the earth holds the seed, without asking why it is there. And when you are ready, which is right now, it is always right now, let us begin. Section 1. The ache that has no name. There is an ache that lives in human beings that has no precise name in any language, though every language has tried. The Arabic mystics called it shock. A longing so deep it feels like homesickness for a place you have never been. The Japanese speak of mano no aware, a tender grief for the passing of things, a beautiful sadness woven into the fabric of being alive. The Portuguese have saudade, a word that feels like a song that ends before you wanted it to. The ancient Greeks had pathos, the Persians their dard, and the Sufis, most daring of all, called it simply the soul's knowledge that it has traveled far from its source. You have felt this, not always loudly. Sometimes it is barely a whisper, a flutter in the chest on a Sunday afternoon when nothing is wrong and yet something feels unresolved. Sometimes it arrives at night, in the silence between one thought and the next, like a question written on the wall in invisible ink that only appears in darkness. What is that feeling? Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor who ruled an empire by day and wrestled with his own soul by night, wrote in his private journal, a journal he never intended anyone to read, words that have survived 2,000 years because they are true. If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. But above all, do not be harsh to yourself about the things you cannot yet see clearly. A man who commanded armies and adjudicated the laws of the known world sat alone in his tent and counseled himself, gently, the way a father holds a frightened child. He knew the ache. It did not care that he was emperor. The Buddha, sitting beneath the Bodhi tree in a forest in northern India 25 centuries ago, looked out at the world with his newly opened eyes and said something that was not grand or triumphant. He said something honest. Dukkha, there is suffering. There is this ache. It is real. It is not your fault. It is, in fact, the first truth, the beginning of all honest conversation between a human being and their own life. And Rumi, the 13th century Persian mystic poet who spun his grief into verses that still burn, wrote the very first lines of his great masterwork, the Masnavi, with an image that never grows old. Listen to the reed flute, how it is telling a tale, how it is singing of separations. A reed cut from its reed bed, crying. That crying, Rumi says, is not a malfunction. It is music. It is the soul remembering where it came from. These are not distant figures. They are mirrors. Every one of them is describing the same interior whether you have carried today. But here is what they also say, every single one of them, from different deserts and different mountains and different centuries, they say that beneath this ache, there is something else. Something that the ache is pointing toward, the way a shadow points toward the sun it can never touch. Epictetus, who was born a slave in ancient Rome and became one of history's greatest teachers of inner freedom, wrote, "Seek not that the things which happen should happen as you wish, but wish the things which happen to be as they are, and you will have a tranquil flow of life." He was not telling us to give up. He was telling us to stop fighting what is already here, including ourselves, including this ache. Because the ache is not evidence that you are broken. It is evidence that you are awake. It is the soul's way of saying, I know there is more. I know there is something beneath all this fog. I want to remember. The Sufi masters had a beautiful practice when a student arrived at their door weighed down by the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong with them. The master would not argue. The master would not offer comfort immediately. The master would first say, "Good, you have arrived at the door. Now let us go inside." The door was always the ache itself. The door was always the honest recognition. I am not at peace and I want to be. That recognition, honest, tender, not dramatized, is not the problem. It is the beginning of the answer. Plato, in his dialogues, describes the process of learning not as the acquisition of new knowledge but as anamnesis, remembering. He believed that the soul arrives in this world already knowing everything important, and that the task of education, of wisdom, of the examined life, is not to fill the vessel but to recall what was already in it. The philosopher is not an inventor. The philosopher is someone who stops forgetting. And what does the soul remember when it is finally allowed to be quiet enough to hear itself? Something simple, something that cannot be earned or lost. Something that is there when you wake in the night and the world is dark and all of your defenses are down and you are simply a creature breathing in the dark, warm and impermanent and real. In that stripped moment, before the managing starts again, before the story about yourself resumes, something is simply here, awake, present, undimmed. The Anadolu wisdom tradition, that deep river of insight that runs through Anatolia like an underground stream, feeding from Persian mysticism, from shamanist earth wisdom, from the Greek philosophical tradition, from Islamic Sufism, all of it blended in the plateau soil into something that cannot be entirely claimed by any one tradition. This tradition has a word, irfan, often translated as gnosis or inner knowing, but more precisely it is the knowledge that comes not from books or from instruction but from experience lived deeply and reflected upon honestly. From standing in the field at dusk, from holding someone as they die, from being failed by people you trusted and discovering that you survived, from failing others and discovering that you are still there to be sorry, still there to try again. Irfan is the ache's gift to you. All those difficult years, all those seasons of cloud, they were not wasted. They were producing something, a depth, a dimension, a capacity for compassion that a life of only sunshine cannot grow. The tree that has bent in the wind has roots that go deeper than the tree that grew in shelter. You are that tree. The Persian poet Sa'di of Shiraz, writing in the 13th century in a garden city that was then one of the great cultural centers of the world, opened his masterwork the Gulistan, the Rose Garden, with a passage that begins as a description of spring and becomes, quietly, an instruction about how to live. He writes of a night spent in a garden with a friend, surrounded by flowers, and then the moment when morning comes and the friend wants to gather all the beautiful things and carry them away, and Sa'di replies, "The true rose garden is not the flowers you have gathered. It is the experience of having been among them. You cannot carry the experience. You can only have it. and having had it, truly having it, with your whole self present and not defended, that is what remains. That is Irfan. That is the deep knowing that no one can take from you because it lives in the place below language, below opinion, below the story you tell about yourself. It lives in the ache and beneath the ache and what the ache has been pointing toward all along. Laozi, the ancient Chinese sage who is said to have written the Tao Te Ching on the back of an ox before disappearing into the mountains, left us this. Knowing others is wisdom. Knowing yourself is enlightenment. Not achieving yourself. Not perfecting yourself. Knowing yourself, which means being willing to sit with what is actually here, without the armor of pretending, without the exhaustion of performing. Tonight we are going to do exactly that. We are going to sit with what is here, gently, without forcing it to be different. The ancient Anatolian mystics, those teachers who walked the high plateaus of what is now Turkey, who wove their wisdom into poetry and prayer and story, had a phrase that translates roughly as, "The heart is a mirror. It reflects whatever faces it." For most of our lives, what faces the mirror of our heart is our fear, our doubt, our harsh internal verdict about ourselves. And the mirror faithfully reflects it back, and we mistake the reflection for reality. Tonight, slowly, we are going to turn the mirror. We are going to let it face something different. Not because we are going to force ourselves to feel better. Not because we are going to build a new and improved version of ourselves before sleep. But because beneath the fear and the doubt and the verdict, there is something that has always been there, patient as bedrock, quiet as the stars above the clouds. And that something is what we are going to remember tonight. Let your body be a little heavier now. Let your jaw soften. You do not need to hold anything in place. The night will hold it for you. Section 2. The mirror that never lies. In the Sufi tradition, there is an image that has traveled across centuries and civilizations and never lost its power. The image of the Dil Nasi, the mirror of the heart. The Sufis believed that the human heart, in its original nature, is like a perfectly polished mirror. It reflects the divine light without distortion. It shows the world as it truly is, luminous, whole, flowing with a grace that has no beginning and no end. But life, they said, is full of dust. Not evil dust, not punishing dust. Simply the ordinary dust of living, the small wounds, the accumulated disappointments, the years of being told in small and large ways that we are less than we are. Layer by layer, this dust settles on the mirror of the heart. And we look in and we see a clouded, distorted image and we say, that is me. That clouded thing is who I am. But the mirror has not changed. The mirror beneath the dust is as perfect as it ever was. The poet Hafiz, writing in 14th century Persia, spoke of this with such tenderness that his words still feel like a hand placed gently on a worried shoulder. Even after all this time, the sun never says to the earth, "You owe me." Look what happens with a love like that. It lights the whole world. He was describing the original generosity of light itself. It does not demand. It does not withhold. It simply shines. You carry that same generosity inside you, not as a belief you must adopt, but as a fact you may have simply forgotten. Dogen Zenji, the 13th century Japanese Zen master who founded the Soto school of Buddhism and wrote with a precision that still startles, said something that seems paradoxical at first, and then reveals itself as the most obvious truth in the world. To study the self is to forget the self. He did not mean to become nothing. He meant to become unburdened. When we stop treating ourselves as a problem to be solved, what remains is a kind of clear, spacious awareness. Like the sky when clouds finally drift apart and you see it was never anything other than open. The Taoists called this original nature Pu, the uncarved block. Before the chisel touches the wood, before the world has shaped it into something specific and defended and named, there is just the wood itself, whole, complete, full of every possibility. The Tao Te Ching says, the Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao, meaning there is something about our truest nature that cannot be captured in language, that lives deeper than any word can reach, that only settles into view when we stop arguing with it. The shamanic traditions, those ancient earth-based wisdoms that existed before any organized religion, in Siberia, in Central Asia, in the steppes and the mountains and the great green forests, understood the self as a living flame. Not metaphorically, They believed that inside each person burns a fire that is not manufactured by that person, but given, kindled from the original fire of the universe itself. When life is difficult, when suffering comes, when people become cruel or frightened or lost, that fire does not go out. It dims. It hides behind the wind, but it does not go out. The shaman's task was never to create fire. It was always to find the ember and breathe on it gently until it remembered how to burn. The Stoics, Seneca, Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, came at this from a different direction but arrived at the same country. They called it logos, the rational, guiding principle that runs through all things, including the human soul. They believed that every human being, regardless of circumstance, regardless of status or mistake or suffering, carries a divine spark of reason and virtue. And Seneca, writing to his friend Lucilius in letters that read as if they were written last week, said with characteristic Roman directness, "Begin at once to live and count each separate day as a separate life. Each day, each moment, complete life, not a waiting room, not a practice run, the real thing, now." And what does it mean to truly begin to live? It means to stop waiting until you have fixed yourself. It means to stop postponing your own tenderness toward yourself until you have met some invisible standard. It means to recognize, as Epictetus recognized in the cold clarity of a life that had given him every reason to be bitter and chose instead to be free, that the one thing no one can ever take from you, the one territory that is entirely your own, is how you relate to what is happening inside you. He wrote, "Men are disturbed not by the things which happen, but by the opinions about the things. And the most disturbing opinion most of us carry, the one we have held so long it feels like a fact rather than a choice, is this: something is wrong with me. That opinion is the dust on the mirror, not the mirror. Let us look at the mirror itself tonight." There is a very old Zen story, told in various forms across many traditions. A student approaches a master and says, "Master, I have been practicing for years and I still feel like I am missing something essential. What is wrong with me?" The master says nothing. He simply picks up the student's tea bowl, already full, and begins to pour more tea into it. The tea overflows onto the table, onto the floor. The student watches, confused, alarmed. "The bowl is full," the student says. "No more tea will go in." "Yes," says the master. "And you come to me already full of what is wrong with you. There is no room for anything else. Put down the bowl. Empty it, not because you are broken, but because something new needs space to be seen. To empty the bowl is not to erase yourself. It is to stop insisting that the story you tell about yourself is the whole story. Because it is not. Because beneath that story, beneath the years of accumulated opinion about your own inadequacy, the mirror is still there, still clear, still reflecting something that has no name but that you have felt before, in the best moments of your life, in moments of unexpected beauty or sudden grace, in moments when the world seemed for an instant to be exactly as it should be and you with it. That is the mirror shining through. That is what we are going to remember tonight. There is a practice in the Zen tradition called Shoshin, beginner's mind. Shunryu Suzuki Roshi said, "In the beginner's mind there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind there are few. The expert mind, the mind that is certain it knows what is wrong with you, certain it has cataloged your failures accurately, certain that the verdict is final, this mind is closed. It has stopped looking. It has confused its conclusions for the truth. The beginner's mind looks at everything fresh, including itself, including you, says, what if I don't know what this is yet? What if the dust on the mirror is not the whole story? What if there is something here I have not yet managed to see? That willingness, that small, barely cracked open willingness, is enough. The Tao Te Ching says, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, and the journey inward, toward the mirror beneath the dust, toward the flame beneath the weather, toward the wholeness that has been there all along, begins with the willingness to look. Not the ability to see everything clearly, not the certainty that you will find something beautiful, not the guarantee of transformation. Just the willingness, just the step. Plato, recording and enlarging his teacher Socrates' thought, gave us the image of the cave. Prisoners who have been chained so long that shadows on the wall seem like reality. When one prisoner turns and sees the fire casting the shadows, and then climbs out of the cave and sees the actual sun, he does not experience this as a defeat of his previous understanding. He experiences it as a liberation. The shadows were real shadows. His perception was accurate. He was simply missing the context that would have shown him what the shadows were. The stories we tell about our own inadequacy are real stories. The pain behind them is genuine. We are not making it up. But those stories are shadows. And the fire that casts them, the warmth at the center of who you are, the original goodness that the traditions all describe from their different vocabularies, that fire is not the shadow. That is what we are going here to find. Section 3. The Sand and the Flame, a story from the desert. There is a story, its roots deep in the soil of Persia and the Sufi teaching tradition, about a woman who walked into the desert to find God and found something she did not expect. She had been walking for 3 days when she found the tent of an old dervish, one of those wandering teachers who own nothing and seem to possess everything. His tent was made of 2 poles and a piece of cloth worn so thin the stars showed through it at night. He had a fire, a clay pot, and nothing else. She sat down across from the fire without being invited. She was past caring about formality. She was past caring about much. "I have been searching," she said, "for years. I have prayed, I have fasted, I have studied, and I feel no closer to anything true than when I began. I am tired. I am ashamed that I am tired. And I have come out into this desert because I do not know what else to do." The old dervish looked at her across the fire. The fire between them was small, a modest burning, enough to see each other's faces. "What do you see?" he asked. "When you look into the fire?" She looked. The flames moved in the night air, small, orange at the base, blue in the middle, yellow at the tips. The wood crackled occasionally. Sparks rose and vanished. "I see a fire," she said. "And what is the fire doing?" "Burning." "And does the fire," he asked, leaning forward slightly, "spend any of its burning wondering if it is burning correctly?" She stared at him. He continued, his voice as quiet as wind over sand. "The fire does not ask whether its flame is beautiful enough. It does not compare its brightness to other fires. It does not remember the cold nights when it almost went out and punish itself for nearly failing. The fire simply burns as completely as it can with what it has in the place where it is." She was quiet for a long time. Above them, the desert sky was a thing of such extravagant beauty. The Milky Way unrolled across the darkness like a river of light that it seemed almost indecent to worry in its presence. "But I have made mistakes," she said finally. "I have let people down. I have failed at things I cared about deeply. How does a fire account for that?" The old dervish smiled. It was not an easy smile or a dismissive one. It was the smile of a man who has walked through his own fire and come out the other side knowing what fire is made of. "Every fire," he said, "consumes things as it burns. That is not destruction. That is transformation. The wood does not remain wood. The darkness does not remain darkness. What appears to be loss is how the fire gives light." He paused, adding a small piece of wood to the flame. "Your mistakes, the things you have consumed, the things that were burned through in your life, they are not proof that the fire is bad. They are what the fire has already transformed. They are smoke and light already. They are behind you. You are the flame, not the ash." In the Sufi tradition, the image of the moth and the candle is one of the oldest and most beloved. The moth is drawn to the candle flame, compelled by a longing it cannot name or explain. It flies closer and closer, and finally, it enters the flame and is consumed. Rumi describes this not as tragedy but as consummation. Not as destruction but as the only possible completion of a longing that was always pointing toward light. We are not meant to stand at a safe distance from our own lives. We are meant to be consumed by them, fully, passionately, without reservation. To burn. The woman in the desert sat with the fire until it burned low. And when she lay down on the cool sand to sleep, she had not solved any of her problems. She had not been given a map or a method or a set of instructions for living better. She had been given something simpler and more lasting. a new image to carry inside her. She was a fire. She had always been a fire. The desert wind could make her flicker. The long cold nights could make her dim. But not one of the difficult years she had lived through had extinguished her. Not one mistake, not one failure, not one disappointment had taken the flame away, because the flame was not something she had made. It had been given to her on the first day she existed, as a gift from existence itself. And gifts do not expire. Marcus Aurelius wrote, in the language of his own tradition, "Confine yourself to the present, not because the past does not matter, not because you should forget what has happened, but because the flame can only burn in the present moment. Cannot burn yesterday, cannot burn tomorrow. It burns here now with what is available. And that burning, however modest, however imperfect, that burning is enough. That burning is everything." The Tao Te Ching, in its quiet way, confirms this. Laozi writes, "Returning to the root is called stillness. The root of a fire is the coal at its center, the hot, invisible core that everything else depends on. When the flame flickers, when the visible light seems to almost disappear, the coal is still there, constant, patient, capable of catching fire again the moment the right conditions return. Your coal has never gone out. Let your breathing be a little slower now. Let the body sink a little deeper. You are not going anywhere tonight. You are simply returning to the root, returning to the still, warm center that has been burning, quietly and without announcement, every day of your life." Section 4. The Jewel Beneath the Dust, a Story from the East. In the wabi-sabi tradition of Japan, that ancient aesthetic philosophy that finds beauty not despite imperfection but precisely within it, there is an understanding so different from the Western idea of perfection that it requires a moment of stillness to receive. Wabi-sabi does not ask, "How can this be better?" It asks instead, "What is the particular, unrepeatable beauty of this exactly as it is?" A tea bowl that has been cracked and repaired with gold, kintsugi, the Japanese art of golden repair, is not diminished by its fractures. It is made more beautiful. The gold lines trace the history of the object. They say, "This broke and it was mended, and the mending is visible, and the visibility is the point. Nothing is hidden. Nothing is denied. The brokenness is not erased but honored." There was a potter who lived in a village on the edge of a forest in old Japan. She had been making tea bowls for 30 years. Her hands were strong and stained with clay, and she worked in the mornings when the light was thin and blue and the air smelled of pine. She was, by any measure, a master. People traveled from distant provinces to buy her work. And yet, in her last years, she became increasingly distressed by her own imperfection. Each bowl she made, she would hold up to the light and find its flaw, a slight unevenness in the rim, a glaze that pooled a little too thick on one side, a curve that was almost perfect but not quite. One morning her young apprentice, who had been watching this for weeks, asked her, "Teacher, when you look at a bowl and see its flaw, what do you feel?" "Failure," the potter said. "I see where the bowl fell short of what it could have been." The apprentice was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that surprised them both. "When I look at that same bowl, I see your hands. I see where the clay moved under the pressure of your fingers and went its own way, and you let it. I see a conversation between you and the clay that neither of you fully controlled. And that conversation is what makes the bowl alive." The potter held up the bowl she had been about to set aside. She looked at it again. The unevenness in the rim, the glaze that pooled, the curve that was almost but not quite. And slowly, something shifted in the way she was looking. She had been looking at it as a failed ideal. Her apprentice had been looking at it as a true record of a living moment. They were looking at the same bowl, but they were not seeing the same thing at all. This is what Bodhidharma, the fierce, wall-gazing founder of Zen, the man who is said to have cut off his own eyelids to stay awake during meditation, whose portrait always shows eyes that will not close, understood about the relationship between effort and essence. He came to China from India in the 5th century carrying a teaching that was devastating in its simplicity. Not thinking about anything is Zen. Once you know this, walking, sitting, or lying down, everything you do is Zen. Not everything you do perfectly is Zen. Not everything you do once you have fixed your faults is Zen. Everything you do, now, as you are, the uneven rim, the pooled glaze, the almost but not quite, the potter kept the bowl. She put it in the center of her display shelf, in the most prominent position, where visitors could not miss it. And when they asked her about it, she would tell them, "That is my best work," not because it was the most technically accomplished, but because it was the most honest. It showed the conversation between intention and reality without editing. It showed what happens when a human hand meets a living material and neither one fully controls the outcome. It showed, in other words, what every single human life looks like. There is a teaching from the Zen tradition that says, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. The activity does not change. The world does not change. The flaw in the bowl does not vanish. But the way we see it, the story we tell about what the flaw means, changes completely. Before, the flaw means I failed. After, the flaw is where the conversation lives. Socrates, in the ancient agora of Athens, cornered wealthy and comfortable men who were certain they knew things and showed them, with devastating gentleness, that they did not, but that this not knowing was not a disgrace. It was the beginning of wisdom. I know that I know nothing, he is said to have concluded. And this was not a statement of defeat. It was a statement of freedom. When you stop defending the certainty of your own wrongness, you stop defending the certainty of your own rightness too. You become, for the first time, genuinely open. Aristotle, who had been Plato's student and had thought harder about what constitutes a good life than perhaps any thinker in history, arrived at a concept he called eudaimonia, often translated as happiness, but more precisely, flourishing. Living in accordance with your deepest nature, being what you actually are, completely without reservation, not performing what you think you should be, being what you are. And the wabi-sabi wisdom of Japan agrees, in its quieter register. The most beautiful thing is the most authentic thing. The tea bowl made by hands that were trying and failing and adjusting and trying again. The face lined by weather and feeling. The life that shows its cracks without shame. The gold is not covering the crack. The gold is the crack seen differently. Tonight, is there something in your own life that you have been treating as a flaw to be hidden? A way you have failed, a crack in the bowl of who you thought you would be by now. What if the gold were already there, already lining that very fracture? Not because the break didn't hurt, but because something real and lasting grew exactly there. Let your body be heavy. Let the image of the golden bowl settle in you like warmth. You are not a failed ideal. You are a true record of a living moment. And that is the most beautiful thing there is. Section 5. The Two Wings, Understanding and Compassion. There is an image common to many of the world's wisdom traditions. A great bird in flight, riding the currents of air above the mountains, neither straining nor still, balanced between effort and surrender. In the Buddhist teachings, this bird has two wings. One is called prajna, wisdom, seeing clearly. The other is called karuna, compassion, meeting what you see with kindness. A bird with one wing cannot fly, can only spin in circles, which is what most of us do when we try to improve ourselves with wisdom alone, without compassion, or with compassion alone, without the courage to see clearly. Wisdom without compassion becomes cruelty. Compassion without wisdom becomes sentimentality. But together, these two wings working in rhythm, they make flight possible. The Tao Te Ching offers us the first wing in its simplest form. The Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao. This is an invitation to see beyond our categories, beyond our names for things, beyond the story we have attached to what we observe. To see what is actually there rather than what we have decided is there. Epictetus gave us the same teaching in the language of a man who had survived slavery. First, say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. But before we can say honestly what we would be, we must see honestly what we are. Not as punishment, as orientation, the way a sailor reads the stars, not to shame himself for being off course, but to find the course again. There is a story from the Zen tradition, set in a monastery where the leaves were always falling, and the cook was always cooking, and the bell always rang at the same hour regardless of what the monks were feeling. A young monk came to the abbot in distress. He had been watching his own mind in meditation, and what he saw disturbed him greatly. "Teacher," he said, "I have been observing myself as you instructed, and I am appalled. I am full of jealousy. I compare myself to the other monks. I resent those who seem to advance more quickly. I find myself feeling superior to the visitors and inferior to the senior teachers, sometimes in the same breath. I have been practicing for 2 years, and I am worse than when I began." The abbot listened carefully. Then he said, "Go to the kitchen." The monk went, confused. In the kitchen, the cook was making soup. He asked the monk to help, and together they chopped vegetables in silence for an hour. After the hour, the cook said, "Have you noticed something?" The monk had noticed many things: the smell of the soup, the cold floor, the satisfying sound of the knife on the board. "Which thing?" he asked. "The water," said the cook. "When we put the vegetables in the cold water, you could not see anything clearly. The surface was dark and flat. But when the water began to heat, everything rose to the surface. The bits of herb, the small pieces of vegetable, the foam, everything visible. And only now can we skim what does not belong." The monk understood something then that he could not have understood from words alone. The meditation had not created his jealousy and his comparisons. The meditation had heated the water. It had made visible what was already there. And the first wing, the wisdom to see clearly, was not a reason for shame. It was the necessary beginning of the skim. But here is where the second wing becomes essential. Because if the monk had responded to what the heating revealed by plunging his hands into the boiling water to punish himself for what he saw, that would be a different kind of mistake. One that the wisdom traditions unanimously warn against. Marcus Aurelius, in his private notes, wrote to himself with striking directness, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." But the strength he was describing was not hardness. He also wrote, "Be tolerant with others and strict with yourself." And the strictness he meant was not cruelty. It was honesty, the same honesty with which he wrote, in the same journal, confessions of his own failures and confusions and moments of weakness. He extended to himself the same patient inquiry he extended to the problems of empire. Seneca, who wrote letters to his friend Lucilius that are among the most honest and tender documents of the ancient world, said, "Treat yourself with the same benevolence you would treat a good friend who has made a mistake." Just that, as simple as that, and as difficult. The second wing, compassion, is not agreement with everything we see. It is not pretending the jealousy is fine or the comparison is harmless. It is the willingness to meet what we see with the same voice we would use for someone we love. "Yes, I see this. Yes, I understand why this is here. And I am not afraid of it. And I am not going to punish you for having it." Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese Buddhist monk who turned his tradition into a living practice for the modern world, described the second wing with an image that has stayed with people across continents. When we have a strong emotion, we can sit with it the way a mother holds a crying baby. She does not need to know yet what is wrong. She just holds the baby, not analyzes, not fixes, not judges, holds. The shamanic traditions understood this through a different image. The shaman who journeys to heal a sick person does not arrive with a list of what is wrong. The shaman arrives with fire, with warmth, with presence. The sick person has been cold and alone inside their suffering. The shaman's first act is always, "I am here. I brought heat. Let the cold know it is not the whole story." When both wings open together, the flight that becomes possible is not escape from your life. It is not rising above your problems into some rarefied altitude where nothing hurts. It is the flight that a hawk makes when it rides a thermal current, still in the same air, still over the same landscape, but seeing it from a place spacious enough to see the whole shape of it. The shadows and the rivers, the forest and the fields, the whole beautiful, difficult map of a life that is real and imperfect and still, somehow, going on. Let both wings open now. Just a little. No effort required. Like the crane spreading its wings at the edge of the still lake in the early morning. Not straining. Just opening. Because it was always meant to fly. The shaman, preparing for a healing journey, spends time in silence first. Not thinking. Not planning. simply attending to what the body knows. The hands resting in the lap, the breath moving, the ears open to the sound of wind. There is a reason for this. The shaman knows that the wings of wisdom and compassion do not open through effort. They open through stillness, through the willingness to stop long enough to feel what is already moving. You have been moving toward the stillness all evening. It is almost here. Let the breath be a little slower. Let the body be a little heavier. And as it becomes heavier, as you settle further into the surface that holds you, notice that both wings are already there. They were always there. The ability to see clearly, present in every moment you have ever caught yourself in a pattern, noticed yourself reacting, watched your own mind with that spark of honest recognition, and the ability to respond with kindness, present in every moment you have ever been gentle with someone else's pain, every moment you have offered patience to a stranger or tenderness to a friend. Those were the same wings. They already know how to work together. You have been flying quietly in small moments your whole life. Tonight we simply name it. We simply say, yes, this is what you are. This is what has always been moving in you. And we rest in that knowing. Section 6. The carried photograph on forgiveness and return. Of all the burdens that human beings carry, the heaviest are not the things that were done to us. They are the things we believe about ourselves because of what was done and what we ourselves have done. The quiet, persistent conviction, kept behind a locked door in the heart, that some of what we have caused cannot be forgiven. Not by others, and certainly not by ourselves. Bodhidharma sat facing a wall for 9 years. Not because he was punishing himself, but because the wall was honest. It showed him nothing false. And in that showing, it showed him everything true. We too have our walls. The places we have been facing for years, unable to look away, unable to move forward, certain that what we see reflected there is final. It is not final. There is a story, set in a time and place of great conflict. A soldier, barely older than a boy, sent far from the only world he knew into a green and unfamiliar country. The details of the conflict do not matter. What matters is this: he carried a photograph for 22 years. He had found it in the pack of a man he could not unencounter. A man older than him by perhaps a decade. A man who had looked at him across a narrow forest path with an expression the soldier spent 2 decades trying to understand. The photograph showed that man standing with a small girl. His daughter, gap-toothed and smiling, squinting into the sun. On the back, written in a language the soldier could not read, were a few words. He had never known what they said. He carried the photograph next to his money, so that every time he reached for anything of value, he saw the face. He built a life. He loved his family. He laughed. He came to know how to be a person in peacetime. But the photograph never became ordinary. Every time, the same burning in his chest. The same impossible question. Who were you? And what do I do with the fact that I could not be different than I was? Seneca wrote, Omnia aliena sunt, tempus tantum nostrum est. Everything is foreign to us. Only time is truly ours. The soldier had been spending 22 years' worth of the only thing that was entirely his own on a wound that he had never tended. Not because he was weak, because he did not know how, because the vocabulary of self-forgiveness had not been given to him by anyone, because the culture he came from was better at accounting for courage than for grief. In the Buddhist tradition, there is an ancient practice, very quiet, very simple, that consists of 3 phrases offered inwardly, like water offered to thirsty soil. For all the ways I have caused harm, knowingly or unknowingly, I offer myself forgiveness. For all the ways others have caused me harm, knowingly or unknowingly, I offer them forgiveness. For all the ways we have hurt each other without meaning to, may there be forgiveness between us. Not magic words, not erasure, just water, just softening of what has become hardened. Just the slow turning of frozen ground towards something that can grow. The soldier, in his 50s, made a decision that surprised everyone who knew him, including himself. He would travel back. He would find the family of the man in the photograph. He would return what had been taken. Not the life that could not be returned, but the image, the record of a father's love for a child, that could still find its way home. The search took months. dead ends and kind faces pointing him further on, and roads that ended at rivers, and the constant voice in his head saying this is foolish. Some things cannot be undone, turn back. And the other voice, quieter and more persistent. You are not going there to undo anything. You are going there to be honest. That is all. In a small village surrounded by rice fields and green hills, he found her. The girl in the photograph, now a woman with her own children. And her brother, a quiet man with their father's face. Through an interpreter, the soldier said the words he had rehearsed 10,000 times, and then in the moment said differently, more simply, more true. I have carried this for a long time. I want to bring it home. The room was quiet. The interpreter translated. The woman looked at the photograph. She looked at the stranger who had carried it across the world. And then she stepped forward and held him. Not because he deserved it, not because the account had been settled, but because the human heart, which Rumi called the mirror of the divine, when it encounters genuine honesty, when it meets someone who has simply arrived and said, I am here, I am not pretending, the heart does not calculate. It responds. It moves toward what is real. Her brother, through the interpreter, said something that the soldier would carry for the rest of his days. He said, in our tradition, when someone carries the memory of another person with such faithfulness across so many years, something of that person lives on in the one who remembers. Today, our father has come home. Aristotle wrote of catharsis, the purging, the release, the liberation that comes when a story that has been held in tension finally reaches its resolution. The soldier experienced something like this, not the erasure of what had happened, not the sudden lightness of a man who has been absolved. Something quieter, the slow return of blood to a limb that has been pressed against too long. Not dramatic, just present again. His own heart, available again. Marcus Aurelius wrote, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. The photograph that had been the soldier's impediment, the thing he had walked around for 22 years, became, when he finally walked toward it, the way back to himself. The lotus grows in muddy water, not beside the mud, not after the mud has been cleaned away. In it, the most sacred flower in the East draws every drop of its beauty from the very thing that seems most opposed to beauty. Your wounds, the places where you have caused harm, the choices made in confusion, the failures of love and patience. These are not the end of the story. They are the mud, and the lotus has already begun. Section 7, the comparing mind and the second arrow. There is a particular form of suffering that is so common it has almost stopped being recognizable. We have confused it with conscience. We have confused it with motivation. We have decided that it is what keeps us honest and striving and accountable. It is none of those things. The Buddha called it the second arrow. Here is how the teaching goes. Imagine you are walking through a forest at dusk. The light is going golden between the trees. Your body is easy, your mind is relatively calm. You step on a thorn. Sharp, sudden. You are in pain. That is the first arrow. The thorn was there. You didn't see it. Found you. The pain is real. Now imagine what happens next in most of our minds. Why didn't I watch where I was going? What kind of person steps on a thorn? I should have brought better shoes. I always do things like this. Other people manage to walk through forests without stepping on thorns. What is wrong with me? That is the second arrow. And the remarkable thing, the thing the Buddha noticed and described with such precision, is that the second arrow almost always hurts more than the first. The thorn breaks skin and heals in days. The story about the thorn, if we keep rehearsing it, never heals at all. A woman went home for the holidays one winter. She had been practicing meditation for years. She had read the old teachings. She had changed her relationship to anger, to reactivity, to the way she handled conflict. She considered herself, on the whole, a more patient and aware person than she had once been. And then she walked through her family's front door. Within an hour, the familiar music had started. Her sister was not helping with the cooking. Her brother had disappeared into another room. Two relatives were exchanging the kind of barely polite sharpness that carries ice underneath. A child had gone out without saying a proper hello. By the second hour, she was composing a detailed internal verdict on every person in the house. He is selfish. She is passive. They are childish. Nobody helps. Nobody notices. Nobody cares. The wheel was spinning, gaining speed, each new observation feeding the story, each story producing the next observation, the world becoming evidence for a conclusion she had already reached. This is what Epictetus called the tyranny of opinion. Men are disturbed not by things, but by their opinions about things. Not the sister who wasn't cooking, the opinion that this meant the sister didn't care. Not the brother who had withdrawn, the opinion that this was a personal rejection. The opinions were not facts. They were choices that felt like facts because they were automatic and fast and had been made so many times before. The woman put on her coat and went for a walk. It was cold. The air had that winter quality, clean and slightly sharp, like a kind correction. She walked without destination, past the lit windows of other people's ordinary lives, past a pond gone gray and still, through a stand of bare trees whose branches wrote themselves against the pale sky like lines of script in a language she almost understood. She walked. She breathed. She let the cold do what cold does, which is to make the body very present. And slowly, under all the verdict and the judgment, she began to feel what was actually there. Something soft, something vulnerable, something that had nothing to do with her sister's cooking. It was the feeling she had carried since childhood, so familiar she had stopped noticing it. That said, if everyone is unhappy, it is probably my fault. And if it is my fault and I cannot fix it, then something is wrong with me. The comparing mind. The mind that is always measuring, always finding the gap between what is and what should be. Seneca described it with his characteristic precision. Nusquam est ca ubique est. He who is everywhere is nowhere. The mind that is always comparing is never truly here. It is always in the gap, always measuring the distance between the life it has and the life it imagines should be happening. She stood at the edge of a field. The first stars were appearing, the same stars that had appeared above every human being who had ever stood in a field and felt exactly this way. She placed her hand on her own chest, slowly, without drama, and she stood there, just stood there, not solving anything, not deciding anything, not composing the next paragraph of the internal verdict, just standing there with her hand on her heart, the way you stand with a friend who is grieving, not trying to fix the grief, just present for it. And something ever so slightly shifted, not the facts. The facts hadn't changed, but the relationship to the facts had. The tight, hot knot of certainty, everyone is wrong and it is probably my fault, began to soften just at the edges, just enough to let in air. She thought of a line she had read once, in a letter by Seneca to his friend. The first step toward being good is wanting to be good, not achieving it, not performing it, wanting it. And she realized that the wanting, the very fact that she was out here in the cold, feeling what she was feeling, trying to come back to something honest, that wanting was itself already the thing. When she went back inside, nothing external had changed, but something internal had shifted enough that the house looked different. Not easier, necessarily, but more human, more like a collection of people doing their imperfect best in the only way they knew how, bringing their clouds and their fears and their old patterns into a warm kitchen and somehow managing, despite all of it, to keep showing up for each other. She helped with dinner. She laughed once, genuinely, at something someone said. She sat beside her brother and asked him how he was. And she listened to the answer, not while composing her response, not while evaluating whether his answer met some standard, just listening, with both ears and all of her attention. The Zen teacher Shunryu Suzuki Rashi, a tiny Japanese man who came to San Francisco in the 1960s and calmly began teaching Americans to sit still, said something that has become one of the most quoted lines in contemporary spirituality. You are perfect exactly as you are, and you could use a little improvement, both things, simultaneously, without the first canceling the second, or the second canceling the first. Perfect because what you are, at root, is the clear light of awareness itself, undamaged and undamageable, and in need of improvement because you are also a human being walking through a forest, stepping on thorns, firing second arrows, standing in family kitchens with the comparing mind running at full volume. Both, held together, without having to choose. This is what the Japanese call wabi-sabi. Again, the beauty of imperfect, incomplete, transient things. Not despite the imperfection. Within it, the cracked bowl with the golden seam. The winter field after the harvest. The conversation at the dinner table that is not the conversation you imagined, but is the conversation that is actually happening, which is the only conversation available. The second arrow is always optional. Always. Even when the first one is lodged deep and the pain is real. Even then, the second arrow is a choice. A very fast, very automatic, very well-practiced choice that feels like inevitability, but is not. And every time you notice, just notice, nothing more, that you are reaching for it, that is the moment the Zen teacher was talking about when he said, "How wonderful that you noticed." The noticing is the arriving. The noticing is already home. Section 7.5. The tide that always returns, on forgetting and finding. If you have ever sat down to meditate, even for just a few minutes, even once, perhaps many years ago, you notice something that seemed at first like a failure and turned out to be one of the most important observations a human being can make about themselves. You settled. You tried to stay with the breath. And then you were somewhere else entirely, without any memory of leaving. Replanning a conversation. Rehearsing an argument. Traveling back to a moment from childhood or forward to a worry about next week. The breath still moving. The room still quiet. But you gone. Vanished into the country of thought without a passport or a farewell. And then return. A small, humble recognition. Oh, I was somewhere else. Here I am. This cycle, the drifting and the returning, the forgetting and the noticing, is not a malfunction. It is not proof that you are bad at being present or incapable of stillness. It is, in fact, the fundamental rhythm of human consciousness. It is what the mind does. It goes out like a tide, and it comes back like a tide. The tide does not apologize for going out. It does not congratulate itself for coming back. It simply moves. This is what it is. This is what tides do. The Zen teacher Ajahn Chah said something that has become one of the most beloved teachings in contemporary practice, because it says in a few words what most books fail to say in hundreds of pages. If you let go a little, you will have a little peace. If you let go a lot, you will have a lot of peace. If you let go completely, you will have complete peace. What we are letting go of is not the breath or the moment or the people we love or the responsibilities we carry. We are letting go of the verdict. We are letting go of the second arrow, the story that says our forgetting proves something terrible about us. The forgetting is not the failure. It is the invitation. Every time we drift and return, we have practiced, once more, the ancient essential art of coming home. There is an old monk in a Japanese story who was known for never losing his temper. Students would come from distant provinces just to test this reputation, to find the crack in his composure. One particularly persistent student spent 3 days asking challenging questions, making provocative statements, waiting for the monk's equanimity to fracture. The monk remained unmoved. On the 4th day, the student asked, "Teacher, how is it that you never lose your temper?" The monk looked at him with mild surprise. "I lose my temper every day," he said. The student stared. "But no one has ever seen it." "I notice it quickly," the monk said simply, "and I set it down, not never feeling, not transcending the reactive human interior, just noticing quickly, and choosing in that moment of noticing not to build a house in the feeling, to feel it and to set it down, like picking up the dropped cup and refilling it and taking a sip. That is all, again and again, for the rest of one's life. This is what Marcus Aurelius was practicing in his private journal. Not performing virtue for an audience, but actually catching himself, day by day, in the small and large failures of his own best intentions, and choosing to begin again. His journals are remarkable not for their grandeur, but for their ordinariness. He writes of impatience with people who bore him, of irritation at sycophants, of the desire for recognition that he knows he should not have, of fears that keep returning despite his best philosophical arguments against them. He was a man in the middle of his life, doing his best, falling short and getting up. And this getting up, this is what Epictetus identified as the only real freedom available to human beings. Not freedom from difficulty, not freedom from the body's limitations or the world's indifference. Freedom in response. the freedom to choose how you relate to what is happening. Not once, not in a single dramatic act of self-mastery, but in each small, ordinary moment of noticing and choosing again. The Sufi tradition has a word for this moment of noticing: tawbah, often translated as repentance, but more precisely it means turning, to turn, to face a different direction. Not a dramatic confession of guilt, not a prostration before some imagined tribunal. Simply a turn, a reorientation, the acknowledgement that you have been facing one way and now you are choosing to face another. Tawbah can happen 1,000 times in a single day. It is not weakness to need it 1,000 times. It is, in fact, the practice. The shaman drums and drums and drums, not because the first drumbeat failed, but because the rhythm is the medicine. The return is the rhythm. Every return adds to the pattern. Every return makes the next return a little easier, a little quicker, a little more natural. There is a Zen saying, fall down 7 times, get up 8. Not fall down once, get up twice, clean, restored, finished with falling. Fall down 7 times, get up 8. The falling is part of the counting. The falling is expected, built into the arithmetic. The getting up is what we are counting. The getting up is what matters. And every night like this one, when you have lain down, when you have let the day's weight begin to soften, when you have allowed these words to find you in the quiet that precedes sleep, is itself a form of getting up, a return, a turning toward the light that has been burning in you all along, waiting, as it always waits, without impatience and without reproach. How wonderful that you noticed. How wonderful that you came back. How wonderful that you are here. There is a language older than any spoken word. It existed before the first human shaped sound into meaning. It existed when we were still learning to walk upright, when the sky above us was incomprehensibly vast and the only honest response to that vastness was to reach for the nearest other warm thing and hold on. The language of touch. You knew it before you knew anything else. Before you had a name for your mother's face, you knew the temperature of her skin. Before you had a word for safety, you knew the feeling of being lifted and held. Before you could say, I am afraid, or I am tired, or I need something, you knew, in the cells and nerves and warm interior of a body that had just arrived in the world, that contact meant continuance. That warmth meant life. That being held was the most fundamental confirmation that you were here and that you mattered. Nothing has changed. You are that same body, just older. And under all the competence and the language and the sophisticated management of a life, there is still a creature who needs warmth, who responds to gentleness, who softens at the cellular level when held. The great Islamic tradition has a practice called dhikr, remembrance, the repetition of sacred names, breathed quietly in rhythm with the breath, until the breath itself becomes a kind of prayer. Not because the words are magic, but because the rhythm of saying them brings the wandering mind back to the body, back to the breath, back to the present moment. Like a shepherd's call to scattered sheep, come back, come back. The rhythm of dhikr gathers the self from where it has scattered and brings it home to the body's steady presence. In the shamanic traditions, the drum is understood as the heartbeat of the earth itself. When the shaman drums, the rhythm is not arbitrary. It matches the rhythm of the resting heart. 60 to 80 beats per minute. The heartbeat each of us heard in the womb before we had a name for anything. The first sound the body knew. When the drum plays, something in the body recognizes it. Not intellectually. Deep in the nervous system, in the place where memory lives before words. The drum says, you know this. You have always known this. You are safe in this rhythm. Tonight, your own heart is drumming. Without your direction. Without your assistance. Faithfully, the original dhikr, the first and last rhythm. Beneath all the noise of the day, beneath all the stories and the judgments and the second arrows, your heart has been drumming. All day, every day, your whole life. I am here, I am here, I am here. There was a healer who lived in a village by the sea. One of those quiet, unhurried people who collect the trust of a community over years the way a tide collects stones. She was not known for extraordinary knowledge. She was known for the quality of her attention. When you sat with her, you felt, as people rarely feel in the business of ordinary life, that you were genuinely seen. Not processed, not scheduled, Scene. One day a fisherman came to see her. A large, weathered man with hands like carved driftwood and a reputation for self-sufficiency so robust that everyone was surprised to see him at her door. He sat down in the wooden chair that creaked under his weight and looked at the floor for a long moment before speaking. When he spoke, his voice was rough and apologetic, as if even the act of needing something embarrassed him. "I am not sick," he said. "Nothing is wrong. Not the kind of wrong you can fix. I have not been sleeping. For weeks, I lie down and the mind begins its patrol. Every mistake, every failure, every harsh word I have ever spoken. By morning I am more tired than when I lay down. I feel like my own mind is punishing me, and I do not know how to make it stop." The healer listened completely. When he finished, she did not offer him a method or a philosophy or a program. She reached across the space between them and placed her hand on his forearm. Lightly, just rested it there, her small hand on his rough, sea-darkened arm. They sat like that while the sound of the sea came through the open window. That ancient rhythm, the in-breath and out-breath of the ocean, the oldest lullaby the earth has ever sung. After a time, the fisherman's shoulders, which had been drawn up around his ears like walls, began to lower. His breathing slowed. His jaw, which he had been holding clenched without noticing, softened. When he finally stood to leave, he asked her, "What did you do?" She smiled. "Nothing. I just stayed." Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, "Confine yourself to the present." But the body already knows this. The body cannot live in yesterday or tomorrow. It is always only in the present moment. Every breath the body takes is an act of radical presence. And when we stop fighting the body, when we stop treating it as a vehicle for the mind's endless projects and let it simply be here, when we place a hand on our own chest and feel the warmth of our own hand, the steady rhythm of our own heart, we are doing something the Stoics, the Taoists, the Sufi mystics, the Zen masters, and the shamans all described in their different vocabularies. We are returning to the only home there is. In the shamanic traditions, the healer's first act is always to bring presence. Not knowledge, not technique. The shaman drums, and the drumming is the presence, a sound that the body recognizes as belonging to the oldest rhythms of the earth. The drumming says, "You are not alone. I am here. The universe is here. The fire is here." And in that recognition, the sick person begins to remember their own warmth. Dogen Zenji, in his instruction for sitting meditation, wrote with great care about the posture of the body. Not because the posture was the goal, but because the body is the gate. When you sit with dignity, spine long, shoulders easy, hands resting in the lap the way water rests in a bowl, the mind responds. Something in the relationship between body and mind that we barely understand shifts, and a quality of attention becomes available that was not available when we were hunched and defended. The body knows what the mind has been trying to figure out. The body knows, without being told, that you are here, that you are alive, that your heart has been beating without your permission or assistance every second of every day of your entire life. Through the difficult years, through the doubts, through the nights when you were certain you were failing at everything. Your heart, without drama and without complaint, simply kept beating. There is a man who told a story about visiting his elderly grandmother in her last years. When she lay in her bed in a room with soft light and flowers on the nightstand and the quiet tick of a clock marking the hours of her remaining time. He had driven a long way and had rehearsed things to say. Bright stories, cheerful updates, the currency of comfort that families carry to hospital rooms and deathbeds. But when he sat down beside her and looked at her face, so peaceful, so familiar, so clearly already a little elsewhere, all of his prepared words seemed to belong to a different conversation, one that no longer applied. So he simply took her hand. Her hand was thin and cool and light as paper. He held it between both of his, and they sat in that way while the light moved and the clock ticked and the flowers held their scent. After a long while, she opened her eyes and looked at him, and she said, very softly, "That is the nicest thing anyone has done for me all week." He looked at their hands together, a little embarrassed by how little he had done. "I didn't do anything," he said. She smiled. "Exactly. You just stayed." The same words the healer used, the same truth, from a dying woman and a sea village healer. From opposite ends of life, the same recognition. The most healing thing one person can offer another, and the most healing thing we can offer ourselves, is not brilliance or solution or even understanding. It is presence. The willingness to be here, to not flee, to stay. So tonight, as you lie in your body, this body that has carried you through everything, that has woken up every morning even when you didn't want it to, that has laughed and ached and breathed and held, if it feels right, let one hand rest gently on your chest. Not as a technique, not as a step in a program, just as a way of saying, in the oldest language there is, I am here, I stayed. The warmth of your own hand on your own heart. The body recognizing itself. Coming home. Section 9. The festival at the gate, coming home. We have traveled a long way together tonight. Through desert fires and mountain monasteries. Through the broken and gilded bowl of the Japanese potter. Through the circle drawn in a palm and the warmth of the hand that covered it. Through the winter field where a woman stood in the cold and listened to what was actually there. Through the 22 years a man carried a photograph next to his heart, and the village in the green hills where he finally put it down. Through the drumming and the flame and the reed that weeps because it remembers the reed bed. And through it all, like a thread of gold running through cloth that might not appear to be one piece, a single truth has been quietly arriving. Not as argument, not as proof, as something you might feel in the body more easily than you can hold in the mind. Nothing is wrong with you. Let us approach this now from the direction of all the traditions we have visited, and let them speak together in a kind of chorus. Marcus Aurelius, in his tent, alone with the lamp and the journal and the truth of his own fallibility, writes, Never esteem anything as of advantage to you that will make you break your word or lose your self-respect. The self-respect he speaks of is not pride. It is the basic recognition that you are a reasoning, feeling creature deserving of your own honest regard. That you have not forfeited this by failing. That you cannot forfeit this. It is in the structure of what you are. Epictetus, who was a slave, who had every material reason to believe that human beings are disposable, who should by rights have emerged from his circumstances either crushed or bitter, says instead, Wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants. The want he most recommended releasing was the want to be different than you are. Not to stop growing, not to stop trying, but to stop needing yourself to already be the finished version before you will allow yourself to rest. Seneca writes to Lucilius, Dum differtur vita transcurrit. While we are postponing, life speeds by. The postponement he warns against most urgently is the postponement of kindness to ourselves. The waiting until we are better, calmer, more successful, more enlightened, more finished. Life is passing in the waiting. The festival is not somewhere ahead. The festival is here. Laozi in the Tao Te Ching writes, Return is the movement of the Tao. The Tao, the great flowing nature of things, does not move in straight lines toward a destination of completion. It moves in circles, in spirals. It returns. The river returns to the sea. The season returns to spring. And the human heart, however far it has wandered from itself, contains within it the impulse of return. Always, without exception. Dogen, the Zen master who woke in the middle of the night with a startled, laughing recognition that the Buddha nature he had been seeking was the very awareness with which he was seeking, Dogen writes, The whole moon and the entire sky is reflected in one dewdrop on the grass. The infinite in the particular, the complete in the small. You, in this moment, lying in the ordinary dark of an ordinary night, contain the entire sky. You are not a fragment trying to find the whole. You are the dewdrop in which the whole moon is reflected. The Sufi master said, Al-insinsiri wa ana siruhu. The human being is my secret, and I am the human being's secret. The divine and the human, meeting in the secret space of the heart. Not opposed, not one dominating the other, but woven together in a mystery that no theology fully captures and that the heart, in its quiet moments, simply knows. The shamanic tradition says, the fire is never truly out. Even in the deepest winter, even after the greatest storm, the coal at the center holds. The shaman does not create new fire. The shaman finds the coal and breathes on it. Your coal is not out. It has been breathing all this time, in the deepest unobserved center of who you are, waiting for exactly this, a moment of quiet. A night when you are willing to stop. A hand placed on the chest. An exhale that is a little longer than usual. And the Anadolu tradition, that deep, warm current of Anatolian wisdom, carried in folk songs and in the silences between words and in the hospitality of people who will offer a stranger the last bread in the house without thinking twice, says simply, Seve lim, sevelelum, let us love, let us be loved. The beginning and the end. The first word and the last word. Everything else is middle. There is a student who traveled from a great distance to ask a teacher the question she had been carrying for years. Who am I? Beneath all of this confusion, beneath the stories and the doubt and the searching. Who am I, really? The teacher looked at her for a long quiet moment. Not in a hurry, not performing wisdom, just genuinely attending. Then she said with the simplest possible words, "Who is asking?" The student opened her mouth to answer and stopped, because the question had turned her around, pointing her gaze from outward to inward, and she found herself looking at the only thing that was indisputably, undeniably there. The awareness that was present for the question. The quiet, open, undefended aliveness that was sitting in this room, that had been sitting in every room she had ever been in, that had looked through her eyes at every single thing she had ever looked at, not a separate observer floating above the life. The life itself, awake to itself, clear as water, warm as fire, as present as breath. "Oh," she said softly, and then she began to laugh. The teacher laughed with her, and the laughter was not celebration of a clever answer. It was the release of something that had been held too long, the unclenching of the fist that Rumi described, that ignorant fist pinching and twisting the secret self. When the fist opens, what comes through is not something she had manufactured or earned. It is what was always there, pressing against the grip, the light of the stars, the universe itself, flowing through her. Rumi, writing in 13th century Persia, in a language that was itself a form of prayer, left us one of the most beautiful images in the literature of the inner life. He described himself as the crescent moon put up over the gate to the festival. Think about this. A warm evening, an old city, a path winding through stone walls and lit lanterns, music coming from somewhere ahead, the smell of bread and flowers, the sound of voices talking with the particular ease of people who have put their work down for the evening and are simply, completely here. And above the gate, above the entrance to this celebration, hangs a crescent moon. Thin, luminous, patient. The moon does not perform. It does not explain itself. It does not earn its right to hang there by being perfect or flawless or maximally bright. It simply shines. And by shining, it says to everyone who passes beneath it, "Welcome, come in. The festival is here. You are that moon." Not metaphorically, not after you have done more work on yourself. Not once you have addressed your flaws and corrected your patterns and become the person you have always thought you should be. Now, tonight, in this breath, exactly as you are the light above the gate. And the festival you are illuminating is not some future state of completion. It is this breath, this body, this ordinary, extraordinary night, this whole imperfect, beautiful life that is yours and no one else's and will not be repeated anywhere in the universe for as long as the universe lasts. Aristotle said that the highest human function is theoria, a kind of clear, open beholding of what is true, not controlling it, not improving it, simply beholding it, seeing it whole. Let us do that now. Let us behold, without judgment, what is actually here. Your body, heavy and warm, held by the surface beneath it. Your breath, moving in its ancient and automatic rhythm. The darkness around you, which is not threatening but simply the sky doing what the sky does at night, resting. Being dark so that the light can mean something in the morning. Somewhere outside, the actual sky is full of actual stars. They have been there every night of your life, whether you could see them through the clouds or not. Billions of years old, some of them. Light that left its source before human beings had language, before we had fire, before we knew we were something that could wonder about anything. That light arrived tonight, having traveled across distances we cannot feel with our bodies, and it found the specific darkness on this specific night while you were lying here, and it became a star as seen from the only place it could be seen from, exactly where you are. The shamanic traditions speak of humans as skywalkers, beings who have the capacity to move between the ordinary world and the world of spirit, between what is visible and what is real. The night sky in these traditions is not empty space. It is the visible evidence of a universe that is paying attention. The fire above that answers the fire below. You are the fire below, and the universe, in its patient and extravagant way, has been answering you all along. So let us finish here in the oldest tradition of all, the tradition of simply sitting together in the quiet, letting the teachers and the stories settle into the body like rain settles into earth, not trying to hold any particular thing, trusting that what belongs to you will stay. The Buddha said, "Peace comes from within. Do not seek it without." The Tao Te Ching says, "Returning to the root is called stillness." Epictetus says, "Seek within yourself a different kind of good, that which comes from making progress." And progress, for him, was always measured inward, toward honesty, toward freedom from the opinion that external things define you. Seneca says, "Begin at once to live." Rumi says, "Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing there is a field. I will meet you there." Bodhidharma says, "Not thinking about anything is Zen." Dogen says, "To study the self is to forget the self." And the old woman whose garden held everything, flowers and thorns together, wild grasses and cultivated rose. She says, "In my garden, nothing is a weed. Everything that grows here belongs here." Aristotle says, "Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom." And knowing yourself does not mean cataloging your failures with ruthless precision. It means seeing yourself as you actually are, complex, imperfect, capable of great tenderness, prone to small cruelties, reaching toward something better, falling short, reaching again, alive, continuing. Here, Ibn Arabi, the great Andalusian Sufi mystic who traveled from Spain to Damascus carrying a mind so vast and a heart so open that the traditions could not contain him, said, "Do not restrict yourself to one form of faith, for the divine light is in every direction. The same light is in every direction of your own interior, the difficult corners and the illuminated ones, the parts you are proud of and the parts you have tried to hide. The same light moves through all of it." And Yunus Emre, the wandering dervish of Anatolia who sang songs so simple they became eternal, wrote, "I found my truth inside myself, and now I'm no longer searching, not because the searching was wrong, but because the searching had finally turned in the right direction, inward, not to find something hidden, but to recognize something that had been there all along, waiting with the patience of the earth for the seeker to stop looking outward and simply look. You belong here, not in some future perfected state. Here, in this life, in this body, on this night." The Persian mystic Hafiz wrote, in a poem so full of light it seems to generate its own, "Even after all this time, the sun never says to the earth, 'You owe me.' There is no debt. There has never been a debt. The light that moves through you does not keep accounts, simply shines, and it has been shining through you, despite the clouds, beneath the doubt, behind every harsh thing you have ever believed about yourself, without pause, without withdrawal, without a single moment of giving up on you." The Sufi image of the candle, the oil lamp, describes the human soul not as the oil or the wick or the glass that holds it, but as the light itself, the flame that cannot be contained in any of its components, that is somehow more than the sum of everything that produces it. That is what you are, the light, not the container, the light. And the desert, in the tradition of those who walked out into the vast silence and listened, the desert is not the absence of everything. The desert is what remains when everything unnecessary has been stripped away. The essential things, wind, sky, fire, the sound of your own breathing, the stars, the great unedited fact of being alive. You have been walking through a kind of desert, perhaps, for a long time, carrying things, looking for water. The water is inside you. It has always been inside you. Laozi writes, "The highest good is like water. Water benefits all things and does not compete. It finds the lowest place. It does not insist on the high ground. It flows around every obstacle without bitterness, and eventually, Given enough time, it shapes even the hardest stone into something soft. Your own goodness is like that water, patient, unarguable, moving around every obstacle you have put in its path, not because it is weak, but because it does not need to fight. It is already everything. There is one more image from the Anadolu tradition worth carrying into sleep. There is an old Anatolian saying, "Taz yurinda girder." The stone is heavy in its place. What is in its right place does not feel like burden. The river in its bed does not labor. The flame in the lamp does not strain. The soul in its own nature, resting in what it actually is, rather than in the performance of what it imagines it must be, does not tire. Tonight you can put the stone down. Tonight you can let the river find its bed. Tonight the flame can simply burn, without asking whether it is burning correctly or brightly enough or in the right direction. Just burn. Just be here. Just breathe. That is enough. It has always been enough. It will always be enough. Let your breathing be slower now, easy as the tide, coming in, going out, not because you are making it happen. It is already happening, has been happening, faithfully and without your help, every second of this day and every day before it. Tonight there is nothing to do, nothing to fix, nothing to achieve. The grass does not strain to grow. The moon does not work to shine. The star's light does not labor to travel across the universe to find this particular darkness. And you do not need to work tonight to deserve the rest you are already receiving. Nothing is wrong with you. There have been clouds. Yes, dark ones sometimes. Storms that lasted longer than seemed fair, longer than you knew how to bear. But the clouds are weather, and weather passes. And beneath every single one of them, throughout every storm of your entire life, the sun was shining, unchanged, unchilled, unhurried. Your goodness is like that sun. It did not dim when you failed. It did not withdraw when you made the wrong choice. It did not abandon you in the years when you abandoned yourself. It is shining now, as you breathe, as you rest, as the night holds you with the same patient, enormous, undiscriminating generosity with which it holds the mountains and the rivers and the stars. You are the light above the gate. You have always been the light above the gate. And the festival, this life, this breath, this unrepeatable, messy, tender, astonishing thing you are in the middle of living, the festival is already here. It has been waiting, patient as a crescent moon, for you to look up and see it. Welcome in. Rest now. You are home. Music gentles slowly to silence, a single note fading into the breathing dark, and here, in the silence that remains, there is nothing left to explain, nothing left to teach. The words have done what words can do, which is to point, to indicate the direction, to stand at the crossroads and say, that way, the way you already know, the way you have always been going, even when you thought you were lost. Every tradition we visited tonight was pointing the same direction. The desert fire, the mirror of the heart, the golden bowl, the wave returning to shore, the drum matching the heartbeat, the student who asked who is asking, and found their answer in the silence that followed the question. All of it, one direction, inward, downward, to the root, to the ground, to the undimmed flame that has been burning in the center of what you are since the first day you drew breath in this world. You do not have to hold onto any particular image from tonight. The ones that belong to you will stay. The rest will dissolve gently, like morning mist, and leave behind not emptiness but clarity. The particular clarity of having been, for a little while, completely here. In the wabi-sabi tradition, there is a deep appreciation for the moment just before completion. The tea bowl still warm from the kiln, the garden just after rain, the sky in the minutes before sunrise when the darkness has softened but the light has not yet arrived. This moment, right now, between wakefulness and sleep, neither fully one nor fully the other. The threshold, the ma, the Japanese word for the fertile space between things. You are in that space now. Let it hold you. Let the darkness be soft and generous as a great pair of hands. You have been enough today. You have been enough every day. Sleep well. The flame will still be burning when you wake. Thank you for walking with us tonight.